You are now tuned into the truth frequency.
We are TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
All right, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining me this evening. It was something was really weird, but it seems to have cleared up. And so hopefully you can hear me all good. Just somebody in the chat room let me know whether the sound is coming through clear. This evening I'm going to do a follow-up on the show that I did last Thursday where I was speaking about paradise, the architecture of the world, and how it ties together with some of the mythology surrounding such places as Asgard, Thule, Hyperborea, Shambhala, all of these very ancient mythological places which the gods, the demigods, and the elder race were said to have lived, and that culture and civilization had supposedly sprung from this central point, that this was the mother culture, the root race, so to speak, and that from there everything diverged out, and all of the different cultures and civilizations which are the most ancient, such as the Vedic in India, the Sumerian, some of the South American with the cultures that predated the Aztecs and the Mayans, the Olmec, and even before then, and even here in the United States, that there are very old archaic ruins, many of these huge megalithic mounds sites where supposedly ancient giants had been buried, and a full regalia of their armor, that there was much Hebrew writing also discovered in strange and anomalous fashion, that there were other temples of Egyptian artifacts. There's the Kincaid discoveries, the reported discoveries in the Grand Canyon of a elder Oriental Egyptian type race, and that structures were found in the interior of some of these mountains, huge temple complexes with Buddhas supposedly sitting in lotus fashion, and things of that nature. So there's worldwide a story of destruction happening down upon a certain fallen angelic civilization, the Atlanteans, and even prior to that, that there was what is represented in days as the golden age, where the gods and goddesses, the demigods, these spiritual, supernatural beings and entities descending here to the earth, that they found themselves trapped up in flesh, and that they were then caught up in this the wide complexity of this world, but that previous to them, they were gathered in the heavens with the rest of the angelic hierarchy, and that something occurred which led to their banishment here to the earth, and to their dominating this realm, and to their also leading astray those that were already inhabiting this particular plane of existence, that they found themselves being deceptively lied to, and also at the same time being granted knowledge and the secrets of the heavens as carried forth and passed down by the fallen ones themselves, and that this began an era of what is referenced in the mythology as Zaptepe, the first times, or the prior times. And so I'm going to cover some of this information this evening, tying together this particular scenario with what is revealed of the different rumors and mythological accounts of the northern pole, which William Warren, he wrote a book called Paradise, the North Pole as the Cradle of Humanity. And in that particular book, he covers from all the different cultures and oral traditions, the mythologies worldwide. He does a really good job of piecing together and bringing forth knowledge about this mother culture, this mother um, civilization. And, and in doing so, he really helps to bring forth a story that even James Churchward, he wrote about in great detail with his whole series on the symbologies and the language of Mu, the culture and the peoples of Mu, which he said went back 50,000 years into our ancient past. So let me check just to make sure. I'm still hearing a lot of feedback for whatever reason. But yeah, somebody in the chat give me a heads up as to whether everything sounds all right. Hello, Gina, Stephanie, Olive, Monster, other guests, Omega. It's good to see everybody. All right, I'm just going to assume everything is good. Otherwise, I'm sure people would be yelling at me that things were not. And so, again, just talking a little bit about the ancient cultures, it seems like when you begin to look at the ancient poets, the ancient philosophers, Plato and others, there's always the unifying tale, the underlying story that speaks about a race that came up and had existed in a place called Hyperborea, which Hyperborea, that is the land beyond the north wind. And as I covered in the first show, I was speaking about the connections with Isaiah chapter 14, which for those that are not very well versed, have not read much of the biblical narrative, which there are, that is the chapter which is specific to the fall of Lucifer and his being cast out of the heavens and exiled here to the earth. He becomes the leader of the rebel, the fallen angels, and he also is, instead of ruling over the heavens as he had originally designed, intended, he is banished to the lower realms, and he becomes the head of legion, said to be preserved in the northern hollow earth entrance into the abysmal chasm or the bottomless pit. And so this evening I'm going to go into, which I want to share this passage first, because this will set the premise for everything again. It says in verse, I'm going to skip that. I'll start with verse 8 because this is an interesting particular passage. Actually, I'll start with verse 5 so I can explain this. The Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke. He that ruled the nations in anger is persecuted, and none hindereth. The whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing. Yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations, all that they that speak and say unto thee, art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? Thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy viols, the worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. And so this whole reference, and even passages like Ezekiel 28, they speak about and they give us understanding as to Lucifer's station before his fall. Before being cast out of the heavens, in my opinion, he took on the title of Satan, which means the adversary. And that his name, for those that don't know, his name is Samael, which meaning the viper or the angel of death is what he is, the adversary. And it was when he rebelled that death had come into being, and that the Most High God even had to admonish his rebellion, and then to establish what would be this second world age in this particular dimensionality as response to his rebellion, his insurrection. And there's two passages that speak about this. In the Ever New Tongue, which is a text that not a lot of people had heard about, but that I shared in fullness in the last chapter of my newest book on paradise, the sides of the north and the mount of the congregation, because it speaks about in this particular text the way that the Most High had revealed unto Moses the design of the creation, the architecture of the world, and that in this particular text, it references how all things had been established in circularity, in roundness, such as the circle of the earth being inscribed upon the waters of the deep, the circuits, the tabernacle of the heavens, and how they unify the motions, the movements of the stars, not around the sun, but around Polaris as the one fixed star of the celestial night. And that this particular, even what we see revealed in the square and the compass, the Masonic symbolism behind the square and the compass, in my opinion, it is connected to the earth being inscribed upon a cube. And that this is why in scripture we see that the earth is spoken about as having four corners, and that the, again, this circle, the square and the compass being the circle of the earth, the square being the cube that it was inscribed upon, that this is what we see revealed in this particular secretive knowledge. And that the elites have always, with their mythology, with their symbolism, they have brought forth certain aspects of truth, and hoarding it, share it openly in plain sight with those that are part of their secretive societies, to these mystery schools and religions, and to those that are counted as number among their fold, which is why we see even on the United Nations flag, we see the circle of the earth, um, and the continents surrounding, encompassing the polar north in azimuthal equidistant projection, which, again, that's the map that Mercator and other map makers used when sharing the details of the layout of the continents, the land masses, and even those that are said to reside in the polar regions, that the polar projection map, which I am greatly interested in, and that I share in Revelation within this particular book. In my opinion, it shows when you study and you go back to some of these older maps that there is revealed within them at the northern pole, which is the center of the earth plane, the rivers of Eden, and that there is this mountain of the gods, the mount of the congregation, spiritual Zion, Mount Olympus, Mount Sumeru or Meru, that this particular mountain is said to be located there and surrounded by a massive eddy, which swallowing the oceans of the world for 6 hours at a time and then spewing them out for 6 hours creates the cycles of the tides that we see dominating the whole, as far as the levels of the sea, that there is a period of when the seas are swallowed, and this creates low tide, and then them being expelled, spewed forth in geyser, that this is what creates high tide, and that these two cycles dominate the whole pattern of the tidal rhythms. And so, anyways, in the Ever New Tongue, in verse 21, it says, There was, it is said, in the orbital circuit the material of the universe, to wit, cold and heat, light and darkness, heavy and weightless, wet and dry, high and low, bitterness and mildness, strength and feebleness, roaring sea and noise of thunder, the odor of flowers, the chant of angels and pillars of fire. All these then were in the round, multiform cloud, which was made of the material of the universe. And 'tis there that the stuff of hell was produced, for hell was not made at once, not until the archangel transgressed God's will, and forsook the law of the king who had created him, together with the innumerable crowd of the angels. Till then, hell was not made, but its material was stored away in the realm multiform mass, out of which the universe was separated, with all the kindreds which exist therein. And if the angels who had sinned had remained in the nature in which they had been created, and in the angelic radiance, the material of hell would have been turned into a beautiful, bright kingdom, like unto the kingdom of the holy angels. And so the Most High had to respond to this rebellion. That initially, as it says in Scripture, everything was created perfect. In Isaiah chapter 45, verse 18, it speaks of the earth being created perfect and to be inhabited. But that something occurred early on, which leading to its devastation, that it would result in the earth being restored, being recreated anew, and that it would be necessary to recreate the earth and to reestablish it in order for it to bear life, that it had become so utterly devastated. It was what the scriptures reference in the Hebrew as a deserted wasteland and an indistinguishable ruin, which, if you really take them a few moments to ponder over the meanings of those words and the kind of chaos that they are bringing forth in imagination, something awesome had to have happened, which led to the earth becoming without form and void. And there's a hint to this also in the legends of the Jewish people. It says the creation of the world, however, could not take place until God had banished the ruler of the dark. Retire, God said to him, for I desire to create the world by means of light. And only after the light had been fashioned, darkness arose, the light ruling in the sky, the darkness on the earth. And so, whereupon it says in the early verses of the scriptures that the Spirit of God hovered upon the waters of the deep, and that the earth being without form and void, that it was the devastating earth, which was being renewed. Otherwise, in my belief, life could not have been continual or ongoing in the manner that we see it now. That the capacity for the animals and creatures kind after its own kind to propagate and to bring forth and to bear children and to multiply and to replenish the earth anew, that somehow that had been, that whole balance and harmony had been desecrated and destroyed. And so, in my opinion, the next few verses therein, we see with the separation of light and darkness and Yahweh Elohim, the voice of the Father calling forth Christ as the light of the world, that it was the light of the world coming forth and bringing the universe from a state of darkness into light, and that light being the giver of life and the establishment of energy in order and beauty, that's what began the whole process, because it's soon thereafter that we see the animals and the creatures appearing, that once the earth, the dry land, is separated from that of the oceans or the sea level, that the animals, the grasses, the plants, the trees, the weeds, the fruit bearing plants, all of that begins to appear. And this was not because of the sun or the light, because so many of us, we believe that, the light from the sun is what initialized and established the growth here on the earth. But according to scripture, all of that was already put into place before even the sun and the moon or the other luminaries were placed into the firmament and in circuit above the earth, which that happened on the fourth day. And so all of these things, the processes and the foundation for life were already laid. And then the luminaries put into place to measure the cycle, the passing of time, that also perpetuated and assisted in the establishment of the whole creative process. And so let me share one of the passage, and then we'll go into some of these other things. In Ezra, second Ezra, it says, "And I said, O Lord, thou speakest from the beginning of the creation, even the first day, and sayest thus, let heaven and earth be made, and thy word was a perfect work. And then was the spirit, and darkness and silence were on every side. The sound of man's voice was not yet formed. Then commandest thou a fair light to come forth of the treasures, that thy work might appear. And upon the second day thou madest the spirit of the firmament, and commandest it to part asunder, and to make a division betwixt the waters, that the one part might go up, and the other remain beneath. Upon the third day thou didst command that the waters should be gathered in the seventh part of the earth. Sixth part hast thou dried up and kept them, to the intent that of these some being planted of God and tilled might serve thee. For as soon as thy word went forth from the work, forth the work was made. For immediately there was a great and innumerable fruit, and many and diverse pleasures for the taste, and flowers of unchangeable color, and odors of wonderful smell. And this was done the third day. Upon the fourth day, thou commandest that the sun should shine, and the moon give her light, and the stars should be in order, and gavest them a charge to do service unto man. And that was to be made. That's Second Ezra chapter 6, verses 38 through 46. And so you can see that, it basically explains what what I was speaking about, commenting on with regard to the processes, that they were not dependent upon the light of the sun and the moon, which a lot of creative stories and stories on the creation, the establishment of the creation, they bring forth in the ideology that it wasn't until the sun shining and interrelating with that of the earth that this is what brought forth life. Which again, I do think that that has a big reason um, for conducting and for especially for plants, that plants are dependent upon the sun, but that the plants were already established and put into place, and that the light of the sun being put into circuit is what fed them and set up the processes whereby which they feed and also transform the carbon dioxide into that of oxygen so that we can breathe it, and that we have air in order to propagate our lives within the grander scheme of it all. And so really quickly before we get to break, I want to speak about in this next segment the architecture of the world, and to give you an idea as to how this whole sides of the north and the mount of the congregation, um, the circle inscribed upon the waters of the deep, how this was put into play as part of the great mystery. Because again, this goes back to the very beginning and the reaffirmation of the creation following it having been destroyed, but that um, the firmament that we have established now, in my opinion, it speaks about it as being part of the newer creation, that it was this impenetrable barrier, the vaulted dome of the earth, that it was established in order to, for a particular reason, only in the last 6,000 years, but that prior to that, something else had occurred. And in my book on the War in Heaven, I speculate that this impenetrable barrier was put into place in order to lock down and to imprison the fallen angels to this particular dimensionality. But that prior to that time, the heavens and the earth were joined and were unified in oneness, and that there was no boundaries because there was not yet a rebellion of the angels, and that it was unnecessary because all the angels served the Most High God as part of the Morning Star administration. And that serving the Most High God, everybody knew their place within the celestial hierarchy, and that it being a well, basically that God ruled over all things, that everything, all the angels and all the creation bowed before his majesty. And the Trinity, which pre-existed with him, that they had, that they were the ones that were ordering and establishing everything according to this grand order. But then again, um, they had to cater to Lucifer and the one third of the angels of the Most High God, which rebelled against them. They had to cater to this free will choice for them to do so. In allowing for such rebellion, allowing for such free will, that's what established the rules for the game, the second world age in this dimensionality, that there would be an interplay between the forces of light and darkness, good and evil, and that humanity would be established and the earth would be established as the playground, the uh, the plane whereupon heavens and hell, that which is above and that which is below, came together in union. And that's what we see being described in the establishment of the ethereal, the perishable from that of the imperishable, the visible from the invisible, and the material from that of the spiritual ethereal worlds. And that's why we see, even with light and sound, that there is a spectrum which we can see only small portion, that there are things in our light spectrum which remain invisible to us and beyond our capacity of perception. And that even dogs are able to hear things we cannot. So all these kind of things play out according to how these spiritual worlds, what are, referenced as the quantum, the energetic, what we see photographed through the Carillion photography, that these particular spectrums of light and visibility can be brought out with technologies, and that these certain things are able to give us uh, a better ability to perceive them. But without them, we wouldn't have any idea as to how these things which remain invisible are here with us right now. Just like with what we see in the x-rays and how we're able to perceive into the body, the gamma rays and microwave. And, there's this whole new telescope now which is able to perceive otherworldly energies and higher spectrums of light. And in my opinion, those kind of things are, the realms of the angelic, the realms of the supernatural. And but again, we have this full overlap, and these particular things are right here with us in the same time space with us, and we often are able to feel, and some people can sense, some people can even see them, but the majority, um, you know the majority discounts, disincludes, and doesn't believe in the existence of such things. But yet again, it is easily verifiable, easily confirmable that there are worlds upon worlds upon worlds all occurring right here in the same time space dimensionality. And so, I want to speak a little bit about the establishment, the creation, because whereas most believe, that the earth is just one small segment of a infinite, ever expanding universal system, that really the earth, the heavens, and Sheol are all part of one system, one congruent, one large, universal, enclosed world system. And that everything is found right here within this particular sensory experience. Starting from a passage where the Chronicles of Jeremiah, it says, "The heavens rise to an immense height in the form of a tent that is spread out, and mortals stand beneath it. Its extremity is below, and its center is above. This is the form of the heavens. Their extremity is below, their center above, so that all God's creatures, as it were, sit beneath it as a tent, and as it is said, He spread them out as a tent for dwelling therein." The one particular passage in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22, where it says that the Most High God sits upon the circle of the earth, and that all the creatures are as grasshoppers, and that we all, in the heavens being spread as a curtain above it, that we all live in what is the shape of a tabernacle or a tent. Well, this is the same premise. There's what is referenced as the seven heavens, which rise from the earth to the top of the vaulted dome, and that it is within these seven portions that the planetary, the objects of the different various planetary system have their tabernacle and are established in circuit. And as I said, and as is very well proven by the motions of the luminaries around the one fixed star Polaris, that this particular um, star is indicative of the very center of this vaulted dome system, and that this is what it means for everything to rise, that the sides of the north, they all gather together, they all meet in apex, the pinnacle of this particular dome, that that center point, the sides of the north, that particular merging point, the place of union for all the directions, formulating this bowl, that they all come together there at that particular point where Polaris resides. And then you have the earth at the bottom of those 7 levels of the heavens. And then you have 7 levels of Sheol advancing into the interior of the earth below what is, the land and the mountains and all the regions of the earth which formulate the land or the sea. And that descending downward, this creates the lower, the as above and so below. That this is the 3-phase aspect of our universal system. Which really, when you study the word of the ancients and the belief systems of the ancient, this is nothing new. I mean, this has been what has been spoken about as being the structure of the earth for a very long time. The Egyptians spoke about the goddess Nut and how she encapsulated the space, the atmosphere where the birds roam and fly freely, and that it is in this same area that the clouds form, gather water, and rain down upon the earth, and that above that we have the stars, the sun and the moon, all circling, moving. And then below that, again, you have sea level, where the land, the dry land, and the waters of the oceans of the world come together in union. The beaches, all regulated by the high and the low tide. And so, this is the scenario. Ezekiel spoke about this. He said, as I watched the 4 creatures, I saw something that looked like a wheel on the ground beside each of the 4-faced creatures. This is what the wheels looked like. They were identical wheels, sparkling like diamonds in the sun. It looked like they were wheels within wheels, like a gyroscope. They went in any one of the 4 directions they faced, but straight, not veering off. The rims were immense, circled with eyes. Over the heads of the living creatures was something like a dome, shimmering like a sky full of cut glass, vaulted over their heads. And, in my opinion, when I read that, it fully takes me back to the time-lapse photography of the motions of the stars over the course of an evening, how they all move in circuit around Polaris. And that those motions, in my opinion, define these wheels within the wheels, these eyes, and this gyroscopic motion. And that once you, have better understanding of this, you see this premise being everywhere revealed. That the Most High sits upon a sea of glass likened to crystal, a paved work of sapphire, that he is seated. There was a voice from above the dome, over their heads. Above the dome, there was something that looked like a throne, sky blue like a sapphire with a human-like figure towering above the throne. That everywhere we see a description of this alabaster mountain. At the center, the mount of the congregation, the top of this mountain is sapphire, a paved work of sapphire. And that the Most High is seated upon this sapphire throne which glimmers, shimmers, and shines like crystalline, a rainbow of colors being cast off. The cherubim bless the image of the throne chariot above the firmament, and they praise the majesty of the fiery firmament beneath the seat of his glory. And between the turning wheels, angels of holiness come and go, as it were a fiery vision of most holy spirit. That was from the Dead Sea Scrolls. All right, I think I can read this one final passage, and then we'll get into paradise when we return. Thus one earth rises above the other from the first to the seventh, and over the seventh earth the heavens are vaulted. From the first to the seventh, the last of them attached to the arm of God. The seven heavens form a unity. The seven kinds of earth form a unity. And the heavens and the earth together also form a unity. It takes 500 years to walk from the earth to the heavens, and from one end of the heaven to the other. And also from one heaven to the next, it takes the same length of time to travel from the east to the west, or from the south to the north. Of all this vast world, only 1/3 is inhabited, the other 2/3 being equally
Listen to
divided
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back.
between water and desert land. All right, welcome back, everybody, for second hour. I also want to remind you that it will be this evening on Revolutionary Radio on Rob Skiba's show on Truth Frequency Radio, that the show we did last week, which was not aired because of technical difficulties, will be released in pre-record. And so if you want to tune in to that particular show, which I thought it turned out really well, where we covered in great detail this newest book, the Paradise, the Mount of the Congregation, the Sides of the North and the Mount of the Congregation. And so anyways, that's kind of what I'm also specifying and speaking about this evening, because there's a lot of things which I revealed in that show, which I'm not going to cover here, but this new book is like 460 pages long, and it's just packed full of information, again, about the different mythological accounts of these mother cultures, where the fallen ones themselves lived, and involving themselves with high technology and magical arts and different things that they were, with the metallurgy, they were artificers of all kinds of things that we no longer are able to do, even with the construction of these megalithic sites and utilizing complex stone patterns and the melting of stones, the joining of stones in union, whether that's levitation or whatever, they were able to put into place and to move blocks of stone, whether it was because of their giant size or because of sound or acoustic technologies. We don't know, but whatever it was that they were able to do, they certainly had a capacity to do things that we cannot in this day and age. And again, whether that is because of, that the giants were here before then, and that they were also of gigantic stature, and also the high capacity with regard to the technologies that we've heard spoken about and rumored, talked about, but that these are forgotten things, just like with a lot of the stories surrounding this particular culture and these peoples. They are lost, and that the Most High had brought destruction, rained down destruction upon them, even in very ancient times. That it says even in the mythologies of the Atlanteans and the different cultures that came up around some of these megalithic sites like Baalbek and Pumapunku, that these places were built by giants, and that they had a capacity for magic that we no longer can understand. That these kind of things were slightly remembered, enough so that there are, like even in Plato, he writes about and talks about Poseidon and how he took a wife of a mortal human woman, Cleto, I believe is her name. I can't remember exactly, but bearing 5 sets of twins, that Atlas and his brothers, Atlas, who became the first ruler of this Atlantean empire, that even the ocean Atlantis and Atlantis as a culture, at the Atlantic, all of that gets its name from this particular giant born of this unnatural human and the supernatural deities, the marriage of them even in those ancient times. And so what we see with regard to culture and to civilization is a degradation from what was very advanced, highly sophisticated, because it was the fallen angels, which is why in the Sumerian kings list we see of that time that they reigned the longest, that the fallen ones in the prior times, in Zep Tepe during the elder times, that they ruled for very, very long time, and that the reigns of the priests and kings that came up after them, the durations got shorter and shorter and shorter. But even during, and we see this same thing reflected in the lifespans of the patriarchs in the antediluvian days prior to the flood of Noah, that even the children of Adam and the sons of Seth, as related in the Genesis chapter 5, where the generations of Adam are referenced and cited, that they lived up to 970 years. And that it wasn't until after the flood of Noah's day, Noah himself living 900 years, his son Shem living 600 years, and then by the time we get to Abraham, which he was alive during the time of Noah and Shem as well, the lifespan of humanity was reduced to 175 years. And then by the time we get to Moses, Moses lived exactly 120 years. And so even the lifespans and, in my opinion, these statures of humanity were diminished going back to those particular ancient times. So that now we have, a generation amongst humanity really being reduced to less than 70 years, which is why even in the Social Security being established at 65 years, it's because most people don't survive to utilize what they've been paying into their whole lives. That it was a huge Ponzi scheme to gain access to a huge slush fund, so that they could utilize this pool and pot of money to do whatever they wanted to, realizing that most of the people would never even tap into the benefits that they paid for their whole lives. And so we see the lifespan of humanity being reduced even more. And in my opinion, things are getting so crazy, so out of hand, and so off kilter with regard to the chemtrails, what we see them spraying up into the skies, the vaccinations that people are being injected with, the unusual amounts of radiation that we are all exposed to, whether, people that use cell phones and that are on the phones all the time or have them up by their heads, or whether it's using Bluetooth technology, the wireless, the Wi-Fi, and all these supposed smart meters being put in place and stuff. I mean, all of that, the microwaves that we use, that people use so much to heat up their foods, and all those kinds of things are harming us in ways that Christ said that unless the days be shortened, there should be no flesh left. And in my opinion, we are that generation that are living and killing ourselves and disrupting the harmony of the creation, the natural cycle, so much so that this could be the final generation. I mean, you look at the children, especially here in this country, that are vaccinated with just all these multi doses of all these multiple vaccines, and many of them are seriously just non-functioning, not capable of taking care of themselves, not capable of surviving and managing the affairs of their own lives. And it's sad. Um, it really is sad, but so many so many parents are worried about their children and what kind of lives are they going to have, and are they going to be able to live. I mean, look at the kind of angst, the over medication of this generation, of the people living with severe depression and post-traumatic stress, especially the military people that are stop lost and exposed to one tour after another, and never even have a chance to unwind or to catch up or to, discover some semblance of normality, that their entire lives, their dreams, and everything are so disrupted that their minds are not capable of dealing with just the natural tendencies of, just managing our daily affairs. And so it's a very difficult time for a lot of people out there. My children just got back from India where they went on a missionary, and they spent a time out there in this orphanage in the northeastern portion of India, where the government has basically just not taken care of, you know, the people in that area, not established any infrastructure. There's no running water. The children of the orphanage, they have to go and uh, gather buckets of frozen water in order to heat it up to make tea or to wash their clothes or themselves, and how they're still just so grateful for what they have, and being able to um, be in a place where they have uh, a semblance of normality, having come out of very abusive and just terrible situations. And yet, in this culture, we're so blessed and so over. Um, Really, we're overly blessed and overly spoiled, and yet we don't recognize such blessings. And most people even have a hard time contending in the bounty of what they are surrounded with, so that they are depressed or frazzled or unable to deal with the circumstances of life. It's just really strange how different people live in different parts of the world, and how 80% of the people live on less than $2 a day. And yet you find such joy and laughter, and the children just not realizing how little they have. They eat the same foods every day and are grateful, just to have enough to eat and to not be hungry. And yet here in this culture, we have a wide variety of offering. And but if people are unable to eat the same things, they have to have different variety every day, and extravagant meals, and you know have to have all these different drinks and Starbucks. And I mean, we're so spoiled. It's insane. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to get off on a rant, but um, it's a sad thing that we don't appreciate, we don't have gratitude for what we do have. Which, the whole thing for Thanksgiving and that particular holiday, the Native peoples, they are giving, it's a Thanksgiving bounty. Even like with the Hebrew, the celebration of the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement, repenting and fasting and recognizing, having gratitude, and uh, being humbled, thanksgiving to the Most High for, everything, the bounty of harvest and food and meal and everything, and just the recognition of how our ancestors, having wandered through the wilderness for 40 days, being fed manna from heaven, having the rock split open so that they could have water to drink when they were dying of thirst and famished in the dry desert heat. How the Most High God, really takes care of all things, all of our needs, and yet we just don't recognize, don't really. I mean, how many people even really pray before their meals? That in it itself is just, a simple prayer of gratitude to the Most High God who gave us all things. How difficult is that? And yet, there's not a lot of people that really pray before their meals or before the water that they drink, Just a little lift up your liquid to the heavens and acknowledgement to the Lord God that he gave us all these things. But anyways, all right, I'm going to go back to the structure of the world. I was speaking about the unity and how it all rises, the earth and the heavens, and Sheol, and how they meet together in structure. And then it says, of all this vast world, only 1/3 is inhabited, the other 2/3 being equally divided between water and waste desert land. Beyond the inhabited parts to the east is paradise with its 7 divisions, each assigned to the pious of a certain degree. The ocean is situated to the west and is dotted with islands upon islands inhabited by many different peoples. Beyond it, in turn, are the boundless steppes full of serpents, scorpions, and destitute of every sort of vegetation, whether herbs or trees. To the north are the supplies of hellfire and of snow, hail, smoke, ice, darkness, and windstorms. And in that vicinity sojourn all sorts of devils, demons, and malign spirits. Their dwelling place is a great stretch of land. It would take 500 years to traverse it. Beyond lies hell. When you really, in that show that I did with Rob, we were talking about the locust army, the supernatural armies, which being released from the north at the end of days, they have a large part to play in the decimation of those that yet are here upon the earth, the wicked that are not written into the books of life. It says that 2/3 of the people left during that time will be decimated. And in my opinion, it's these supernatural armies, the Joel chapter 2, the Revelation chapter 9, these giants and fallen angelic entities, which are said to be loosed from their particular regions so that they may carry off these sentences, this destruction against the peoples of the world remaining alive at that time. How far are we from all that? I don't know, but I do believe we are the final generation, and that this is why we see all these things being revealed and coming to light, even now. That so many, the Spirit is being poured out on all flesh, and so many are being led to similar discernment. And also tomorrow evening, I'm going to be doing a show where I answer a lot of the questions that Carol has gathered from those of you that have been sending in questions. And if you do have something you'd like to ask or you'd like for me to address, you can go to fallenangels.tv or to sacredwordpublishing.net and submit a question, and then Carol will be sure that I receive it. Also, for those that are trying to follow and that are studying the calendar, tonight is the 15th of Tevet. Tevet, the Hebrew month Tevet, Tebet or Tevet, depending on how you spell it. But that this is the full moon Sabbath. And so it is on Wednesdays this month for the next 2 weeks that the third quarter Sabbath and the lunar conjunctive Sabbath occur. And then we will have a Rosh Chodesh. I believe it's on the 20th. I released it in the post that I made on Facebook today. But anyways, the calendar, the 2018 Enochian ancient lunar calendar has been released for those that are wanting to know how to maintain the Moedim and to keep up with the Sabbaths and the feast days and festivals according to the movement, the circuits of both the sun, the moon, the stars. That all of that is revealed in it. And the calendar is really it's beautiful. I took a lot of time to select um, really incredible photographs, which Joy, my daughter-in-law, her father is a photographer that lives out in California, and he takes just really incredible photos of all this just beautiful, because there's like 90% of the national and state parks, the most beautiful ones, are found in that region near where he lives. Yosemite, Kings Canyon, Sequoia National Park, the redwoods of California, the Valley of the Giants, Mount Zion, um, the Moab, Grand Teton National Park, all these, the Glacier National Park, all of these are close within at least a day's drive. Some being just a few hours away to San Francisco in that particular area. And so you definitely you should check it out. And even for those that don't, want to purchase the calendar, we do make it available on our website, the monthly portions. And so you can find that there. And so as I said, tonight is the third Wednesday, the 3rd of January. It is the second, the full moon Sabbath, the 15th of Tevet. This is the 10th month of the Hebrew calendar, which, the Hebrew calendar is linear and progresses from spring to winter. And whereas the Gregorian solar calendar, it's a celebration of the winter solstice, and they begin the new year in January after the Saturnalia festival of the winter solstice. And so that's why the new year on the Gregorian calendar begins in January on the 1st. But really, this is the middle of winter, and the new year doesn't end this year doesn't end for another 2 months. And then it's the beginning near the vernal equinox that spring begins. And that's really the beginning of the year. In Exodus, the Most High God, when he establishes this particular calendar, the ancient Enochian lunar calendar, as I have it plotted out I converted the Gregorian to this ancient Enochian. That's when the calendar begins, is on the vernal equinox. That's actually the near the first day of spring, that it is whatever the month, the sighting of the new moon, wherever it is nearest the vernal equinox, which this particular year, the sighting of the new moon occurs on the day before the vernal equinox, and so they're almost completely aligned. But and so yeah, all of that, that begins the very beginning of the year is spring, the first 3 months of spring, the vernal equinox to the summer solstice. The summer solstice begins the 3 months of summer. And then when the sun reaches the equator again for the autumnal equinox, that begins the 3 months of fall. And as we just had this December 21st, the sun reached its southern limit, and that reaching the winter solstice, which is the longest night or the shortest day, that it reverses course and begins moving back northward. And the winter solstice begins the 3 months of winter. And even though we are, in the coldest months of the year, we are now gaining sunlight again. We're gaining, approximately 4 minutes of sunshine a day, and the day is elongating. So at least we're moving back to longer days, and as we get to where the day and the night are in equal 11.99999 hour portions, then we will return to warmth. And really, it's amazing how all that works once you understand it. And so, anyways, this year, in this month, on the 10th, we have the third quarter Sabbath. On the 17th, we have the lunar conjunctive Sabbath. And then you have the day of translation on the 18th, which is the 30th of Tevet. And then we have Rosh Chodesh for the month of Shavat, the 11th month of the Hebrew calendar, beginning on the 19th of January, which is Friday. And then you have the first quarter Sabbath on the 26th. And then we move into the next month. And, the month of Adar, which will occur on the 18th of February. That's the last month in the Hebrew calendar. That's the beginning of the last month. And that's the Rosh Chodesh, as I've calculated it, is when the moon is near 7% full, which in the book of Enoch, he tells us that when the moon is one half of a 14th portion full, that is the beginning of the lunar month. And incidentally, that is also the first day that the moon can actually be sighted in the skies after sunset, um, before she goes down. Because when the moon is in lunar conjunction, she moves with the sun, meaning she rises when the sun rises, moves across the sky as the sun moves across the sky, and then sets when the sun sets. It's only when, because the moon lags behind the sun 50 minutes each day. And so as she moves separate from the sun and creates a little bit of distance from it, then it is in that evening after the sun goes down that she will be spotted in the western skies for just a few hours before, after sunset, before night becomes fullest. When night in her purple legions, and you can spot the thin sliver of the waxing crescent moon in the western skies on those evenings where the sun reaches 7%. I mean, the moon reaches 7% full, which is, one half of a 14th portion or 1/7 portion, or 0.0714%. And so, anyways, Shane asked, when did March 22nd stop being the new year? Well, when they changed I believe it was in the 4th century during Hillel, when they stopped observing the lunar calendar. And this was when Constantine, during that 300, all around that time, that Christianity and paganism were married, and the Roman Catholic Church was created as a hybrid mix of the two. And then many of the ancient Hebraic traditions were Christianized, paganized, and now we have these celebrations of things like Christmas and Easter and those kind of pagan holidays instead of the Levitical feast days, which are again Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Pentecost or Shavuot, Yom Teruah, which is the Feast of Trumpets, and then the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Weeks or the Feast of Tabernacles. And so, all of that has been changed. All right, going back to paradise. All right, I wanted to share one last thing with this particular passage. It says at the very bottom of this particular text, it says, in the east, the west, and the south, heaven and earth touch each other, but the north God left unfinished, that any man who announced himself as a god might be set the task of supplying the deficiency and stand convicted as a pretender. Now, this is connected to Isaiah chapter 14 because remember, the north is the sides of the north when Lucifer declared himself and wanted to exalt himself above the stars of the God, that this is what that the Most High is speaking about with leaving the north unfinished, that the bottomless pit, that place where hell hath no covering and stands naked and bare, as is reverenced in Job 26 and also Enoch chapter 18, I believe, that where again it says, the highlighted portion of this text, in the east, the west, the south, heaven and earth touch each other, but the north God left unfinished, is deeply profound, as it is tied precisely to what Lucifer alluded to in Isaiah 14 as these sides of the north and the location for the mount of the congregation. The north is the only direction that the vaulted dome of the earth rising in apex does not in any way meet, touch, or join in merger with the earth as described in link with the other three directions. And so the north is, again, it's the only place that the vaulted dome does not merge in union with the earth. And so it's the only direction that it makes any sense that, in connection to the shape of the vaulted dome, that rising in the apex, this direction does not meet or touch with the earth, which is also what Amos alludes to in chapter 9:6. The one who builds his upper chambers in the heavens and has founded his vaulted dome over the earth. He who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the face of the earth, the Lord is his name. We have in these particular passages, for instance, this one from the Chronicles of Jeremiah, it says, the boundaries of the heavens touch the waters of the ocean. For the waters of the ocean flow round the extremities of the heavens, and the earth and the extremities of the heavens are spread upon the waters of the ocean, as it is said, who layeth the foundation of his upper chambers in the waters. That's the passage I just read from. The heavens rise to an immense height in the form of a tent that is spread out, and mortals stand beneath it. Its extremity is below, and its center is above. This is the form of the heavens, their extremity is below, center above, so that all God's creatures, as it were, sit beneath it as in a tent. As it is said, he spread them out as a tent for dwelling therein. And so you see all these different passages. I'll share one more. He said, and then I made firm the heavenly circle, and made that the lower waters which is under heaven collect itself together into one whole, and that the chaos become dry, and it became so. Out of the waves I created rock hard and big, and from the rock I piled up the dry, and the dry I called earth. And the midst of the earth I called the abyss. This is that vortex at the middle of the northern pole that drains the oceans of the world. It's called the bottomless pit, or the abysmal chasm. And the midst of the earth I called the abyss, that is to say, the bottomless. I collected the sea in one place and bound it together with a yoke. And I said to the sea, behold, I give you your eternal limits, and you shall not break loose from your component parts. Thus I made fast the firmament. This day I called the first created. And that's from the second book of Enoch. And so, there you have three witnesses for the firmament being the outer boundaries of the earth. I'll share one more passage about the firmaments, which is very interesting as well. It's the only place I found in Scripture which makes mention of how thick the firmament actually is. It says this. On the second day, God brought forth four creations, the firmament, hell, fire, and the angels. The firmament is not the same as the heavens of the first day. It is the crystal stretched forth over the heads of the Hayat, which are the cherubim, from which the heavens derive their light, and the earth derives its light from the sun. This firmament saves the earth from being engulfed by the waters of the heavens. It forms the partition between the waters above and the waters below. It was made to crystallize into the solid by heavenly fire, which broke its bounds and condensed the surface of the firmament. Thus, fire made a division between the celestial and the terrestrial at the time of creation, as it did as the revelation on Mount Sinai. The firmament is not more than 3 fingers thick. Nevertheless, it divides two such heavy bodies as the waters below, which are the foundations for the nether world, and the waters above, which are the foundations for the 7 heavens, the divine throne, and the abode of the angels. And so the firmament is 3 fingers thick, and yet it is considered to be an impenetrable boundary, in that it's the firmament which establishes, much like a snow globe, the outer boundaries, and as a basin keeps all the waters of the sea bound together. This is a passage about that. The basin of the bottomless sea, gathered together by his workmanship into its reservoirs, passeth not the barriers wherewith it is surrounded, but even as he ordered it, so it doeth. For he said, so far shalt thou come, and thy waves shall be broken within thee. The ocean, which is impassable for men, and the worlds beyond it are directed by the same ordinances of the Master. And so, again, you see that it is the structure of the firmament which puts a boundary and establishes the limits for how far the proud waves of the sea can go, that they are measured and that there's a limit set for them. And so, anyways, all these things are spoken about, covered in great detail in this new book. I speak about the particulars, and I give you so many passages, so many scriptures from so many different sources which affirm the truth of those things that I'm bringing forth. I don't expect anybody to believe anything that I say, but to go and study it for yourself, because you'll see that these kind of things are mentioned all throughout Scripture, and yet it's only because we no longer understand the premise of where we live and what is going on with regard to those premises as the true nature of reality, that we completely miss what Scripture is alluding to. But there are literally hundreds of texts which detail the world, the cosmology in which we live. But because we are filtering everything through a heliocentric mindset, we're missing out on so much of what is real. And so I hope that the work that I do helps you to better understand the creation, the creator, and our place and part within it. Even like Ecclesiastes, which most people, when they read Ecclesiastes, they don't attribute it to the motions of the sun or to the boundary, the limits that were put into place to keep and to contain the reservoirs of the oceans in the basin of the sea. Which, when you read the Targum version of the Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, 3 through 7, but especially verse 7, you get an understanding for the same concept that I'm bringing forth. All the rivers and springs of water continually flow into the water of the oceans, which surrounds the world like a ring, but the ocean is not filled, and to the place is where the rivers continually flow. They return there in order to flow from the spouts of the deep. There's all these things, and I'm not going to read anymore, but I do cover in great detail also the Srimad Bhagavatam in this particular book, which, if you've never read it, it is very precise. I mean, like the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries in the book of Enoch, it gives great detail on the specifics of how the world is situated, how the stars move. Like Enoch, he describes in great detail over 14 chapters the motions of the sun, the moon, the stars in these circuits, their orbits around Polaris. There's no motion attributed to the earth in the Bible or any of the extra biblical books I've read, which should tell you something. Um, but of course, the earth does not move. But, anyways, yeah, all these things, when you study them and you revisit them in new manner. Well, thank you, guest. It says that I explain it so well, it makes it easy to see. Yeah, I'm just, review this material with new insight. Open yourself to the possibilities of what I'm saying. And then review the materials for yourself and see if what I am bringing forth has any bearing on truth. But if the scriptures also say, prove all things, take what is good, leave the rest, and that it is the glory of God to hide a matter, to conceal a matter, and the glory of kings to search it out, that we are to seek and to learn, to knock and to discover and to try to find before judging, condemning, or labeling with our bias um, something as crazy or lunatic fringe. That really, we've been so lied to and so indoctrinated into deceit that most people have no idea what is real and what isn't. This truly is a matrix of illusion, and most people being connected to the teachings that they've been affirmed into, settled upon, and brainwashed within by their parents and their grandparents and their parents and grandparents, and that most of the world believes in nothing but lies. And we have no idea what is truth and what isn't. And so it's time for us, in my opinion, to second guess all we thought we knew of truth and to question ourselves with regard to everything that we've been enclosed and brought up upon with regard to reality. Because in doing so, I believe that many of you'll come to the same discernment as me that it's a lot bigger than just 9/11. That we thought that was huge. And we thought, oh my gosh, if the governments of the world could lie about that, I mean, what else are they lying about? And then learning that, all the moon landings, the Apollo missions, all that is fabrication. The cosmology, I mean, what else? What else? It's just crazy. But anyways, I appreciate all of you and thank you for taking the time to join us. It is terribly sad, but yes, so very true. Check it out this evening, 12 a.m. to 2 a.m. on Rob Skiba's show, or catch the archives if you can. That show that we did together will be released. I'll be doing a Q&A show tomorrow. If you want to hit me up, if you want to share some questions or comments or concerns or anything, just contact sacredwordpublishing.net or the fallenangels.tv and let us know how things are going for you. Our next meetup will be February 25th, and as long as the weather is nice and permitting, we'll be gathering together outdoors. But if not, then we will be, because things have been really cold lately. But depending on the weather, we're going to at least gather together for lunch. Those of you that are in the Atlanta area and that would like to get together with me for luncheon, contact me, Zen Garcia on Facebook, or zengarcia2010 at gmail.com. God bless all. Good night.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.